The storm was coming fast. The wind was getting louder. Snow was already falling, slow at first, then faster. Thick clouds rolled over the sky. The colors of evening disappeared. Everything turned gray, cold, silent, deadly. She looked up. Her skin, pale, rough, not human, was already covered in frost. Her long fingers held her child tightly to her chest. The child did not move. His eyes were half closed, his breath slow and weak. Her name was Ciari, a refugee from the broken world of Xenari 4. She had escaped the war with only one thing, her son. Now they were both in danger again, but this time, not from bombs or soldiers. This time it was the ice. "Please," she whispered, knocking on the first door. No answer. She moved to the next house, her arms shaking. She knocked again, softer, now. Her voice was breaking. "My child. He is sick. Please." Another closed door. Another silence. The alien mother felt her knees go weak. She dropped to the snow, still holding her son. Her breath came out in clouds. Her legs were numb. Her mind screamed, but her body could no longer stand. The storm was coming fast. She had no shelter, no food, no help. She began to cry. In a small cabin just beyond the road, a man named Jake stood at his window. He was human. He had lived here for many winters. He knew the signs, the wind, the sky, the deep quiet just before the storm hit. He was checking his supplies, firewood, water, canned food, when something strange caught his eye outside. A shape. No, two. One tall, hunched. One small, limp in the taller one's arms. He squinted. "Is that someone out there?" Jake rushed to his door and opened it. A gust of freezing wind slammed into him, but he didn't stop. He grabbed his coat, boots, and flashlight. Then he ran. Ciari didn't see him coming. She was nearly unconscious, her body curling around her son to keep him warm. She didn't hear the footsteps in the snow, but then a strong light hit her face. She looked up. A human stood there, tall, wrapped in a thick coat, his eyes wide with shock. He dropped to his knees beside her. Hey, can you hear me?" Jake shouted over the wind. "You're freezing. Is the kid okay?" She could barely speak, but her eyes said everything. Jake gently reached for the child. The alien mother flinched, pulling away, growling weakly. "I'm not gonna hurt you," Jake said softly. "I want to help. Please, let me help him." Ciari looked into his face. It was kind, tired, human. She let go. Jake scooped the child into his arms and grabbed Ciari with the other. She was too weak to walk. She stumbled. He caught her. Step by step, he led them back to the cabin. The storm howled louder. Snow hit his face like glass, but he didn't stop. Inside the cabin, the heat wrapped around them like a blanket. Jake placed the child gently on the couch. He wrapped him in layers of thick cloth and placed him near the fire. Then he turned to Ciari. She was shivering, wet, terrified. He handed her a towel. "You're safe now. You hear me?" She stared at him, confused, afraid. No human had ever helped her before, not without something in return. She didn't understand. Why was he doing this? But she nodded. Slowly, her fingers touched the towel. Then her eyes turned to her child. He was breathing, barely, but he was alive. She lowered her head and whispered something in her language. Jake didn't understand the words, but he understood the pain in her voice. Outside, the ice storm hit full strength, but inside that small cabin, a stranger had opened his door to someone no one else would touch, and an alien mother had felt, for the very first time, a tiny spark of hope. The fire crackled softly. Jake sat beside the small alien boy, gently brushing melting ice from the child's cheeks. The boy's skin was bluish-gray, thinner than human skin, and looked far too cold. His tiny chest rose and fell slowly. Ciari sat in the corner, shaking, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes never left her son, but her gaze kept drifting to the man. Jake, a stranger, a human, and yet he had lifted her son without fear, without gloves, without disgust. No one had ever touched her child like that, not on her home planet, not here on this cold world. Not even the aid workers who once tossed them a blanket or food. They looked at them like they were bugs. But this man had placed his rough human hands on her child's skin, with care. Jake poured warm water into a bowl and dipped in a soft cloth. "I'm not a doctor," he said, glancing at her, "but I've seen fever before. I think he's sick from the cold. We need to get his body warm." Ciari didn't reply. Her throat was dry. Her voice wouldn't come. She had learned some human words in the camps, but none of them felt right. Now, so she watched. The man leaned forward and pressed the damp cloth to the boy's forehead. His hand was shaking. He was tired too. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered suddenly, her voice hoarse and unsure. Jake looked up, surprised. "Because he's a child," he answered. "And you're his mother." That answer didn't make sense to her. Where she came from, strangers only helped when there was something to gain. Kindness always had a price. Compassion was just another word used before a betrayal. But this man, he had built a fire, wrapped her son in warmth. He even placed food on the table untouched, waiting for her to eat when she was ready. He asked for nothing. Sherry moved closer, step by slow step. She knelt beside her child and touched his tiny hand. It was warmer now. Jake quietly stood and walked to the kitchen space. He made soup, thick, hot, and full of flavor. When he returned, he handed her a bowl and a spoon. She held it, confused. Jake smiled gently. "Eat. You need strength. He needs you." Sherry stared at the soup for a long time before lifting the spoon to her mouth. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something broke inside her. That night, the storm beat against the cabin like a monster trying to get in. Wind roared. Snow piled against the door. But inside, there was warmth. Jake gave Ciari a blanket and laid her a place to sleep beside the fire. He took the chair, watching both mother and child with tired eyes. She didn't sleep much. She kept waking, afraid this was a dream, that the cabin would vanish, that Jake was a trap, that he would demand payment in cruel ways like others had. But every time she opened her eyes, she saw the same thing. A human man, asleep in a chair, arms crossed, breathing slow. And her child still safe, still alive. In the morning, the storm had not ended, but the child's fever had. He opened his eyes for the first time in 2 days. Ciari gasped and dropped to her knees beside him. She whispered his name, her fingers touching his cheeks, his small head. She checked his heartbeat again and again. He blinked at her and smiled. Jake, who had just finished boiling more water, looked over, and for the first time, Ciari looked at him, not with fear, but with something close to trust. She bowed her head low, a Zunari gesture of deepest thanks. Jake didn't understand it fully, but he nodded. "You're safe here," he said softly. "I promise." Outside, the world was still cold, harsh, and dangerous. But inside that small cabin, a mother had seen something new. Kindness. And it had come from a human. Ciari didn't sleep, even after the storm quieted, even after her child's fever went down. She stayed awake, watching the human. Jake had given her everything: warmth, food, safety. But her heart wouldn't let her rest. Something had to be wrong. On her planet, kindness like this always came with danger. Back there, a soft smile often hid sharp teeth. A warm meal was usually the start of a trap. She had trusted once. It had almost cost her child's life. Jake stirred from his chair. He blinked at the fireplace, rubbed his face, and stood up slowly. His back cracked as he stretched. Then he noticed Shari sitting up, alert, her eyes hard. "Still awake?" he asked, his voice soft. She didn't answer, he didn't press. Instead, he quietly walked over and checked the small alien boy. The child was still sleeping peacefully, wrapped in layers of warmth. Color had returned to his cheeks. Jake let out a breath of relief. Then he stood up and walked toward the door. Ciari's eyes sharpened, her muscles tensed. She moved fast and blocked the door. "Where are you going?" she asked in a shaky voice. Jake stopped. He blinked, confused. "I'm just going outside. I need to check the snow level. Make sure the chimney isn't blocked." She narrowed her eyes. She didn't understand all his words, but his calm tone made her pause. Still, she didn't move. "You leave. Take child," she said slowly, her voice trembling. Jake's eyes widened. He finally understood. She thought he was going to steal her son. He held up both hands. "No, never." He walked back to the couch and gently placed a hand over the boy's blanket. "He stays here, safe, always. I'm not like them." Her breath caught. Not like them? Did he know what they did to her? To others like her? Had he seen it? No. She realized. He didn't need to see. He understood anyway. Still unsure, she stepped aside slowly. Jake went outside. The cold bit at him, but he didn't care. He shoveled a bit of snow, cleared the vent, and returned minutes later, covered in frost. Ciari handed him a dry cloth. She didn't speak, but Jake smiled a little. It was the first time she had offered anything back. Later, that day, Sherry sat near the window watching the snow. Her son slept calmly behind her. The fever was gone, but the boy was weak. She gently brushed his hair, her fingers light as feathers. Then, something strange happened. She heard a laugh, a human laugh. She turned. Jake was behind the kitchen counter, struggling to fix an old toaster that sparked every time he touched it. He grinned and muttered, "This junk's older than me." Ciari tilted her head. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He was laughing at himself. Back on Zunari 4, people didn't laugh when things broke. They screamed, hit, blamed, but this man, he chuckled. And that small, strange sound made something shift inside her. That night, Jake placed a new bowl of soup in front of her and sat down across the table. "Your name?" he asked softly. Ciari looked up, surprised. He pointed to himself. "Jake." Then, gently pointed at her. She hesitated, then spoke slowly. "Ciari." Jake smiled. Then he pointed to the boy. Ciari's eyes softened. "Tiva." Jake nodded. "Tiva. That's a strong name." She didn't know if he was just being kind, but it didn't matter. It was the first real conversation she'd had in weeks. Maybe months. Later, while her son slept, Ciari stood near the fire. Jake was working on something in the corner, stacking old books, fixing broken wires. She watched him closely. His movements were calm. No sudden tricks. No hidden threats. Still, her mind whispered doubt. What if he turns? What if this is all a trap? What if he wants something later? But then she saw it again. Jake quietly placed an extra blanket over her son. No one told him to. No one asked. He just did it. And in that moment, for the first time, Sherry wanted to believe. The cabin was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Sherry touched her son's forehead. Her smile faded. It was warm again. Too warm. She felt his small hands. They were burning up. His breathing was fast and shallow. His lips were dry. The fever had returned. Stronger. She panicked. Ciari shook him gently. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. He whispered something in her language, then went still again. Jake rushed to her side. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. One look at the child's face told him everything. The infection hadn't left. Ciari looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. She grabbed Jake's arms, her voice shaking. "Please, please help. He will die." Jake didn't wait. He rushed. To his supply box, throwing it open, bandages, soup, warmers, but no medicine. He cursed under his breath. The storm had kept him locked inside for days. The road to the nearest outpost was still frozen. But if the boy didn't get help soon, there wouldn't be a later. Jake grabbed his heavy coat, scarf, boots, gloves. He wrapped extra cloth around his chest. Ciari watched with fear. "You leave? Why?" He turned to her. "There's a med box at the old station, just a few miles down the hill. He needs it." "It's still snowing," she shouted. "You'll freeze." Jake walked over, looked her in the eyes. "If I don't go, he won't make it through the night." Then, before she could stop him, he bent down and lifted the boy into his arms. Ciari gasped, stepping back. Her mouth opened to protest, but she didn't. Jake wrapped the child in layers of blankets and tucked him into the inside of his coat, close to his body. "He'll stay warmer this way," he said. Then he opened the door. A blast of snow and wind hit the cabin like a punch. Jake didn't flinch. He stepped out into the storm with her child in his arms. The door closed. Ciari stood frozen. She stared at the wooden frame as if it had stolen her soul. He took him. He took her baby. What if he doesn't come back? What if this was the trick all along? Her knees gave out. She dropped to the floor, hands covering her face. For the next hour, she didn't move. Her mind was loud, but her heart was louder. Still, she remembered his eyes, his voice, his touch. No one had ever held her son like that, not even her own people. Jake pushed through the storm. Each step was a fight. The snow came up to his knees. Ice stuck to his beard. His legs were going numb, but he didn't stop. "Come on, little guy," he whispered to the small figure inside his coat. "Stay with me. We're almost there." But he wasn't sure. The old outpost was buried in snow. The path was almost gone. Wind roared like a monster in the trees. Then, a shape appeared in the white fog. A roof. A door. Jake pushed forward and kicked the door open. Inside was freezing, but dry. He laid the child down, breathing hard. His fingers moved fast, searching the old cabinet, and then he found it, a medical box. Old, dusty, but still working. He opened it and pulled out the fever patches and injectors. "Please work." He placed the medicine on the boy's skin, one by one, whispering soft words no one could hear. Back at the cabin, Sherry sat like stone. Her ears listened for a knock and footsteps on anything, but the wind was all she heard. Then, hours later, a sound. Creak. The door opened. Jake stumbled inside. He looked like a ghost, face pale, body covered in snow, breath wheezing. But in his arms was her son, still wrapped, still warm, still alive. Ciari ran to them. She helped Jake set the boy down. Her fingers shook as she pulled back the blanket. The boy's chest moved gently. Color had returned. Ciari gasped. Her mouth trembled. Then, finally, she cried, not in fear, not in pain, but in relief. She looked at Jake. His face was red and frozen, his eyes barely open, but he smiled. "He's okay now." Ciari fell to her knees in front of him. She pressed her forehead to the floor. She didn't need words. The gesture said everything for the first time in her life. She had seen real compassion, and it had come from a human. The cabin was warm again, but Jake wasn't. He lay on the floor near the fire, wrapped in thick blankets, his lips slightly blue. His hands trembled. His skin was ice cold. He had saved the child, but paid the price. Ciari sat beside him, her long alien fingers gently touching his forehead. He had a fever now, not from sickness, but from the cold that had almost frozen him alive. Tiva, her small son, was sleeping peacefully nearby. His chest rose and fell softly. The medicine Jake brought had worked. Ciari had feared she would lose her son. Now she feared she might lose the man who saved him. She boiled water the way she had seen Jake do it. She dipped clean cloth in the warm bowl and pressed it to his face. His neck, his arms, again and again, he coughed. His eyes fluttered open, but only for a second. "You came back," she whispered softly. His lips moved slightly, barely making a sound. "Told you. I would." She looked at him, this strange, brave human who had no reason to care. And yet he had run into the storm. He had risked his life. He had carried her son through a frozen death just to find help. Why? That question echoed in her heart like thunder. In the middle of the night, Jake's fever worsened. He shook, he groaned. His skin burned hot now, too hot. Ciari didn't panic. She sat beside him all night, holding his hand, cooling his forehead, speaking in her native tongue. Stories, songs, prayers, not because she thought he would understand, but because it felt like the right thing to do. No one had ever done it for her. Now she would do it for him. By morning, his breathing slowed. The fever was breaking. Ciari leaned close, watching him carefully. Jake opened his eyes. This time, fully. He saw her sitting there holding a cup of water. Her face was calm, her hands steady. She offered the cup. He drank. Then he smiled. Weak, but true. "You stayed," he said. She gave a small nod. "Yes, just like you did." There was a fire in his eyes now, not from sickness, but from something deeper. Kindness, strength, something she had never seen in any being before. Jake slowly sat up, leaning against the wall. Ciari helped him, placing a pillow behind his back. She didn't speak much, but her actions were clear. She trusted him now. Later that day, Jake tried to stand. His legs were weak, but he forced himself up. Ciari moved to help, but he waved her off gently. "I'll be fine," he said. "I've been through worse." But the truth was, something in him had changed too. He didn't just see an alien woman and child anymore. He saw a family that had been broken by war, pain, and fear. And still, they had survived. Still, they were here. He made tea. She set the table. They shared a quiet meal. No loud words, no long talks. Just peace. Tiva woke up, yawned, and crawled into his mother's lap. Then for the first time, he looked at Jake and reached out a hand. Jake smiled and touched the tiny fingers. That small hand, once cold and dying, now felt warm. Alive. Ciari watched the two of them, and for the first time in a long, long time, she smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. It was real. Outside, the snow was beginning to melt, but inside the cabin, something far stronger was growing. Trust, hope, and maybe, just maybe, love. The storm had passed. For the first time in many days, light came through the small cabin window. The sky was clear. The wind had stopped. Birds had returned to the frozen trees outside. But inside the cabin, something more important was happening. Ciari was changing. She stood by the window, holding a warm cup Jake had made for her. Steam rose from the drink, soft and sweet. She wasn't used to this comfort, quiet, peace. Her child, Tiva, was playing with a spoon on the floor, humming to himself. His cheeks were full of color again. And Jake? He was sitting at the table, fixing a broken radio, his hands working slowly. Ciari watched him from the corner of her eye. She didn't look away as fast as before. The woman who had once flinched at every sound. The woman who had slept with her eyes half open. Now, she was breathing easy. She was beginning to feel safe. Jake looked up and caught her watching. Ciari didn't turn away this time. He gave a small smile and nodded. She nodded back. No words, just a quiet understanding. Later, Ciari walked over and placed a plate in front of Jake. It was a strange mix, vegetables, dried root, and something like jam. A dish from her home planet. Jake raised an eyebrow, then took a bite. He paused, then smiled. Wide, not bad. She gave the smallest laugh, a soft sound like a whisper. It was the first time she had laughed in years. They spent the day doing small things. Jake taught her how to light the fire using matches. Ciari showed him how to use her planet's crystal, powder to clean wounds. She spoke slowly. He listened. He spoke simply. She learned. And just like that, a bond began to grow. Not forced, not fast, just real. That evening, as the sun set, Ciari sat beside her son near the fire. Tiva was sleepy, his head resting in her lap. She brushed his hair gently. "He was born during a war," she said softly. Jake looked up from across the room. Ciari didn't stop speaking. Her voice shook, but she continued. "Bombs fell. My mate died. I ran, carried him, hid in caves. Then the camps, the cold, the hunger." She looked at Jake. "No one helped. Until you." Jake didn't speak right away. He walked over and sat beside the fire too. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "You did. You kept him alive, that's what matters." Ciari shook her head. "No. He was dying. You saved him." She paused, then added something in a quiet voice. "You saved me too." For a long time they sat there. No walls between them. No fear. Just two beings, alien and human, sharing a fire and a moment of peace. Ciari leaned her head back and closed her eyes. She didn't jump when Jake moved. She didn't panic when the fire cracked. She simply rested. Her walls, once thick and tall, were beginning to fall, not from force, but from kindness. Outside, snow still covered the ground, but in her heart, something warm had begun to bloom. Morning came quietly. The snow outside had melted just enough to show the dirt path. Sunlight touched the trees. The cold still kissed the air, but it no longer felt deadly. Inside the cabin, the smell of something baking filled the air. Jake stood at the small stove, flipping flatbread on a pan. It wasn't perfect, but it made Ciari and Tiva smile. And that was enough. Ciari sat at the table, watching her son eat. Tiva's eyes sparkled now. He laughed. He played. He was no longer weak. She glanced around the room. The blanket Jake gave her was folded neatly. Her coat hung beside his by the door, and beside the fire, her small bag of things, what little she had left from her home, sat untouched. For once, she didn't feel the need to run. Jake brought over a warm plate and sat down across from her. "The road's clearing," he said, gently. "Soon rescue teams will check this area. You'll probably get help. Transport, maybe a safe zone." Ciari nodded, but something about her eyes had changed. She didn't look ready to leave. After breakfast, Jake went outside to cut more firewood. Ciari stepped to the door and watched him. He worked with slow, steady hands, strong but gentle. She had seen those same hands carry her son through death, cook meals, clean wounds, and offer blankets with no demands. She blinked slowly, and then she stepped outside. Jake paused and looked at her. She held something in her hands. It was a small cloth, a charm from her homeworld, woven with threads of deep red and silver. She walked to him and placed it in his hands. "It means protector," she said softly. "On my world, only the bravest earn it." Jake looked at the charm for a long time, then back at her. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "But I didn't do anything that anyone else wouldn't have done." Ciari tilted her head slightly. "No," she replied. "You did more." That evening, Jake sat near the fire, half asleep in his chair. Ciari stood beside him. She held her son in her arms, watching the man who had given them everything without asking for anything back. Her lips trembled. She took a deep breath, and she spoke the words she had been holding back for days. "We don't want to leave." Jake opened his eyes slowly. "What? You say rescue team will come, they take us, but I don't want to go," she said. "Tiva, he is safe here. I am safe here. With you." Jake sat up. You don't have to decide right away. She nodded. I already have. Silence fell between them. But it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Jake looked at the little boy in her arms, now sleeping softly. He reached over and gently touched Tiva's small foot. Then he looked at Ciari. If you stay, you'll be part of this life. A simple one. Not perfect, but real. She smiled. That is all I ever wanted. That night, Sherry didn't sleep in the corner. She laid her blanket beside the fire next to Jake. Tiva curled up between them. The fire crackled. The cold stayed outside, and inside the cabin a new family was born, not by blood, not by race, but by choice, by compassion, by humanity. She had never known safety. She had never known peace. She had never known compassion until now, until him, until this small cabin in the storm.